Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Don't Risk It podcast presented by VFIS Client Risk Solutions. This program focuses on the exposures our clients frequently encounter and discusses some potential solutions to help reduce these exposures. I'm your host, Chris Rogers with VFIS Client Risk Solutions, and today we're talking about onboarding of leadership. Joining me on the program today are Rick Gerba, Mike Baker, and Blair Tyndall. Rick is the director of VFIS training programs, and Blair and Mike are part of the Client Risk Solutions team. They're all here to discuss some considerations for onboarding a new leadership team. Gentlemen, I want to thank you for joining me, and it's always a pleasure to have you all back on the program.
Good to see you, Chris.
Hi, Chris.
Thanks for having me back, Chris.
So let's get started with where would an organization likely start when considering a leadership change?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's a challenge for organizations of all sizes, but the smaller organizations in particular need to start somewhere, and there's a lot of information that we're going to talk about here today. But one of the most important things to start with is your foundational documents, things such as your bylaws, your foundational documents such as your incorporation paperwork or your charter, and what kind of gives you the structure to be able to operate as a business in today's world. Those foundational documents need to be reviewed to make sure they're accurately reflecting what your business is as of today, and if they need updated, to address them in timely fashion.
So what are some technology impacts an organization might consider as part of the onboarding process?
Yeah, so the change in your leadership team is obviously going to create some new needs to put out some things to your forward-facing or your outside-facing avenues. Some of those things that come to mind are some of the technology, right? A lot of departments will have either a website or social media or some platform through technology that they use to communicate with. The other thing might be, does your department have mobile devices, cellular phones, laptops, things of that nature that are assigned to each of these leaders, or access to those accounts or the areas that those systems need to have access to? So you're going to have to change all of your access rights for those individuals, domain names, logos, things of that nature, titles, business cards, all come to mind as you have these changes in your leadership team. And then the one and probably more important thing in today's society with the social media and communication is each member or each leader is now going to have a designated email or a group email associated with the division or department that they're associated with. So again, all those technology changes need to be considered when you're developing this new leadership team during the onboarding process.
So I think you mentioned change probably 4 or 5 times in your last answer. So it's obviously, quite a bit of administrative changes are necessary. One that comes to mind is notifying the Department of State for officer changes. Are there any other avenues or any other areas that you want to cover?
Yes, Chris. As Rick kind of alluded to in the very beginning, you just have to remember the continuity of the organization. You've got to be, and a lot of times, permitted. Documents have to be filed to continue to operate as an emergency service organization in each state. So that usually involves tying back into what Rick mentioned earlier with the bylaws, articles, incorporations, and those kinds of things. If you have a change of a board member, or some states use the term board of supervisors. If you have a change in that particular area, you need to make sure that those board members complete a conflict of interest statement, that background checks are done on those individuals if they're going to be in charge of handling finances. You may even want to consider a credit report for each individual that's going to be taking those new roles if they hadn't had one done on them before. And this is all just to keep things clean in the public eye. And keep things above board. Also, having statements, that define what the roles of this new individual is inside the organization. What does a board member do? What does a line officer do? Having those job descriptions are really key so that you have something to fall back on in the future in case something comes up that needs to be, addressed. Having these things in place, updating your, for example, if you have a junior membership program, trying to update who's in charge of those members. Have they had the proper training? Have you lost some directors in that area? reviewing the benefits that your department offers to these new members, or maybe you should terminate benefits based on a member that is no longer in that position anymore. There's length of service programs, retirement implications. A lot of states have state retirement implications for fire and EMS workers. So all of those things need to be addressed. And then finally, kind of our go-to statement on a lot of things are, we always encourage when and if applicable, that you have legal representation at your emergency service organization. So you need to notify those people as well as to who is actually the decision makers in the ESO in case things have changed. They need to be aware of who those decision makers are, and then they can offer other suggestions from a legal standpoint of what you may or may not be covering, and something that they may find that you hadn't even thought about. So that's very important as well.
Well, Blair, that's quite a bit of information to digest. But we do have another major category of items when it comes to financial consideration. So since you have the gift of gab, do you want to, what would you suggest an organization tackle in that area?
Since there's so much information here, I'm gonna default my time over to Rick to talk about some of the financial things, and then we can bounce back in on this last topic, because there's really a lot in this last section.
Yeah, agreed, Blair. So I, from an organization taking any one of these topics, there's a lot of information, obviously, and the question of where to start is just taking and biting it off one piece at a time. But specifically related to the financial issues, and I'll certainly pass it around to the team to comment on, make changes to your signature cards at your financial institutions. That's one of the most common things that is difficult to get done because of the volunteer nature of a lot of departments. So that's one thing. Credit reports for those individuals, I'm going to restate that from earlier because that is an important issue. Having credit reports of anybody that's going to be a signature on the corporate account or have decision-making authority related to both the financial and or transactional business of the organization in terms of engaging contracts and so on. They should review the prior end-of-year financial reports to make sure they match what the expectation is from the organization, and so you have a good basis to build upon into the next year. And those are just some of the basic things that a new board or a new chief officer is going to go through and evaluate. So I'm going to pass it along to Mike to see if he has any other comments in this section.
Rick, I really like your point with regard to the end of the year financial reports and balance sheet reviews and so forth. One of the things that I try to encourage a lot of our accounts to look at is considering a financial audit that basically stamps end of story for that last treasurer or financial administrator and new story for the new guy. So it gives a clean slate approach to make sure that everything is financially in line as you transfer that position to the next person. So actually, that's a solid point there on the program. So the other thing that, again, going on that whole financial approach, looking at what loans are out there, what's the projections, what's the budgets, how are we doing things, what are our investments in, meeting with those folks or those third-party vendors or administrators and advisors that the organization has, bring those new leadership up to speed with regard to where things are and what the ultimate plan is and where you are in that plan of attack for your financial futures. Change contacts on states and federal grants. Again, pretty common and certainly makes sense, right? The last thing that I'll touch on is, obviously we're near and dear to the insurance mechanism here at VFIS, but notifying the insurance carrier of, hey, there's a change in officer, who my contacts are, who my primary designated people are for various points of contact. Let's go ahead and touch back on the administrative side a second. Beneficiary forms. It's a good time when leadership changes to go around and do beneficiary updates, demographic updates. Are people still living at the same spot? That goes not only for the leaders, but it's a general checkpoint for the entire roster of your organization.
I think to sum it all up, all of these points are great, and here at the end, Rick's going to give us, where we can find these resources at. But I think from a theory standpoint, overall, you're looking a line of demarcation. You're looking a clean break on everything involved in this particular transition, because whether we like to admit it sometimes or not, volunteer or career, we're running a business, and we should treat it as such. And it's just good business to have this clear break in who's responsible for what. Who was driving the ship at this time, and those kinds of things. It's just a good way to make a really clean break and have this smooth transition and do it as fast as possible, because guess what? On day 2, we still got business to do, right? So the faster you get it done, the better. So, Rick, you want to talk about those resources?
Yeah, Responder Help has a number of those resources available. The impetus of this conversation actually was just that. It was an article that was created about last year at this time, and it came from a financial services article that we did with an external individual. And as a result of that, we had good information that was shared. So responderhelp.com, if you do Responder Help, if you type in, not do, if you type in responderhelp.com/leadership transition, you should be able to find the information, both the article as well as supplemental information to support this conversation.
Well, that seems like a good place to wrap up the conversation that I wasn't very much a part of. You guys seemed to drive the boat there. I kicked it off and you took it and all ran with it and gave a lot of great information. So I want to thank you all for your time.
Thanks, Chris. Great to be here again.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Chris.
And I want to thank you for listening to the program and for your interest in VFIS safety resources. I want to thank our guests Rick Gerba, Mike Baker, and Blair Tyndall once again for their time and information. Please consider subscribing to our program to stay up to date on new content releases. Also, if you like what you've heard, please consider leaving a review below. For more information about the many resources available from VFIS, please visit VFIS.com. And to submit ideas for future discussions, please reach out by emailing VFISriskcontrol@VFIS.com. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day. The views, information, or opinions expressed during this program are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of Gladfelter Insurance Group, VFIS, and its employees.